Mr. Boddy was lucky to survive his car crash, although he was sure that there was more than luck involved. When he came back from hospital, he told us that everything had changed. A new life was about to begin for him and for Arlington Hall. He was going to give up everything to lead the simple life, or so he would have us believe. And no one else had been offered the choice between the way things were and the sweetness and light that Mr. Boddy seemed so suddenly to have found. And someone didn't believe in it, did they? Because poor Mr. Boddy went to his reward a bit sooner than he expected.
How much more time do you want, Professor? Mr. Boddy will be gone by Monday, and then the auctioneers will be in.
Maybe they won't notice.
Well, you noticed, and you're no professional. By the way, you've been making quite a nice little living out of me and Mr. Green, haven't you? Until Mr. Boddy saw the light. It must be very inconvenient for you.
I didn't take that much.
Well, it won't look like that when Mr. Green starts to talk, will it?
He won't!
Oh, yes, he will. He can't face going to jail. He'll name you as the ringleader, the mastermind.
He can't! I only made a fraction of what he made on those antiques.
And then I shall have to look out for my own salvation, shan't I? Come to think of it, blaming you might be the right solution for all of us.
No. There has to be another way.
Then kill Mr. Green. He's too dangerous to live.
A live bullet. Fingerprints, Colonel Mustard. Wrench. Fingerprints, Mrs. White and Professor Plum.
I was in the kitchen with Mrs. White during the drain-clearing saga. The thing was apparently wanted by Plum. He was outside in the yard, and Mrs. White had to take it out to him. I saw it, but that's about as much as I can remember. I went shortly after that. No, can't help you with that one. Not really my thing, lead pipes. However, if I do see one or hear of any sightings, you'll be the first to know. Nobody thought very much of Boddy's decision to join a monastery. No one really believed it, but then no one dared risk ignoring it. Take Mrs. Peacock. When I walked past the study earlier, I heard the makings of a really good row going on. I couldn't resist hanging around to see what happened, and sure enough, out stormed Mrs. Peacock. I glanced into the study and saw Boddy wrapping a blood-soaked handkerchief around his hand. And then there's Miss Scarlett. You should have seen the fuss she made when Boddy announced in the library his decision to join the brothers. She said he was ruining her life. Now, why is that, I wonder? There's bound to be something I've forgotten, but I can't tell you any more at the moment.
Well, I suppose plumbers use them, don't they? But that's not what you're after, is it? No, I haven't seen anything that fits that bill at all. Sorry. Wrench? No, definitely not. I haven't seen one since my Bentley blew up on the Stratford Road, and I don't want to see another one either. The wrench, that is. I will own up straight away to the fact that Boddy had lent me some money to start my own business. Trouble was, I thought that if I could just double it, you know the story, I suppose. Gambling has always been a bit of a problem of mine, and this time things went rather too far. But problems seem to be rife in this house. For example, what exactly was this chap Green's problem? He had a most unorthodox relationship with Mrs. White, who, when all is said and done, is a member of Boddy's household and not one of his guests. But she treats him with what amounts to contempt at times. Most peculiar, if you ask me. I'm afraid I can't think of anything else to tell you at the moment.
Knife hidden. Fingerprints, Miss Scarlett, Mrs. Peacock, and Mr. Boddy. Blood on knife. Tests show blood to be Mr. Boddy's. A letter and receipt from antique dealer to Mr. Boddy, thanking him for his excellent custom over recent months. Fingerprints, Mr. Boddy and Mrs. Peacock.
Yes. Yes, of course you'll get your money, man. Now, are you going to take my business or not? Right. Right. I want £50 each way on Royal Scarab. Yeah, right.
How much are you in hock for now?
The lot. Everything.
You can't pay back Uncle Boddy's loan.
It never got any further than a bookmaker.
You and I share a similar problem, don't we, Colonel? Uncle Boddy isn't signing this place, my inheritance, over to Brother Jerome until Monday. Time enough for a man of action to find a solution, I would have thought.
It's all a game to him, isn't it?
Yes, but two can play these games, Colonel. And I have an idea for a little gambit of our own.
A small key under the table. The spare key to the safe. Fingerprints, Mrs. White. Electric wires taped to handle of safe door. Fingerprints, Mrs. White and Colonel Mustard.
Where's the key? Don't touch it!
What on earth was that? Did you see a flash? My God, it's Mrs. White. She's unconscious.
Will she be all right?
Don't, for God's sake, don't touch anything. Somebody sent for a doctor. I think she's been electrocuted.
Fingerprints, Mrs. White. Lead pipe wrapped in newspaper. No fingerprints. Lead pipe wrapped in
There's no point in asking Mr. Boddy anything. That's one leopard who hasn't changed his spots. Whatever Brother Jerome thinks.
Do you think he knows about the antiques?
Oh, what does it matter? Someone's going to notice that half the antiques in this place are missing. You've seen to that. And they're going to blame you. Because I'm just a little old lady who's been led astray by a wicked con man. So, you better think of something.
You're not getting out of this.
Oh, shut up, will you? By the time I've finished, nobody is going to believe a word you've said. And I'm not going to prison. Not for you, Mr. Boddy, or anyone else. And that is a promise.
What on earth am I supposed to do?
Well, you can take these to the dining room for a start. And then if you want to sleep easy in your bed at night, you'd better think of something, hadn't you?
Yes, I spent an unpleasant hour with it, when I allowed myself to be talked into unblocking one of Boddy's neglected drains. Mrs. White found it for me. Later on, she gave it to me again, but for another purpose. I left it in the hall. Knife? Boddy's knife? No, I have not seen it. I take it you'll agree that I have more than enough on my plate this weekend without knives entering into the equation. We did dine by candlelight. I distinctly remember wondering how fiercely Boddy would burn in the fires below as I sat there watching the wax running down onto the table. Uncharitable, perhaps, but there you are. I don't remember seeing the candlesticks after that. I sent Mrs. White into the house for a hammer. She came back with a piece of lead pipe. One wonders what I would have got if I'd have asked for a screwdriver. A vodka and orange, no doubt. I was very polite and said, "No, thank you. That won't do." I don't know what Mrs. White did with it after that. I can't help you at all with that. Isn't that a rather unlikely item to find around a country house?
What I've got to tell you reflects badly on me, but it certainly doesn't add up to murder. You see, I'd discovered some time ago that antiques were missing from their normal places around the house. I decided to broach the subject with Mrs. White first, thinking there might have been a reasonable explanation. I was shocked when I learned that she and Mr. Green had been removing them. For cleaning, they said, but then not returning them. What this meant was that if Boddy was to hand everything over to the monks, Green would be in serious trouble. Probably jail, I should think, and he wouldn't have liked that. I'm sure I'll remember other interesting facts, but I've nothing to add right now.
Bloodstains. Tests show blood to be Professor Plum's. A pen under the chair. It belongs to Mr. Green. A bullet embedded in the wall.
Take it! Go on!
Get away from me! Take it away!
Mrs. White is going to talk, and when she does, we're both in the dock. So unless you want to explain all this to the judge... No.
I'm not going to do it! Look!
I'll make sure your little blackmail racket comes out into the open. And my friends from London will be coming to see you, Professor. But if I'm in jail, there'd be nothing I could do to stop them, would there? They don't like blackmailers.
What will they do to me?
I think you'd be better off if the police did lock you up. There. Good boy. Go and deal with Boddy. It's your only chance.
No! Take it away! Take it away! I can't do it! I can't do it!
Both candlesticks. Fingerprints, Mr. Green. A glass and stain on the floor. Tests show stain to be wine. Fingerprints on glass, Mrs. Peacock.
If you want to drink while Rome burns, that's fine, but count me out.
Oh, don't be so childish. If we don't work together, we don't stand a chance. And you know it.
You really do have a nerve. Who introduced Uncle Boddy to this Brother Jerome and his henchmen?
I can assure you I didn't do it to cut my own throat, even though that is exactly what happened.
You were always creeping around him, trying to get your hands on him and his money. You can sneer at me as much as you like, but I'm losing Arlington Hall and my inheritance.
You are losing everything because you borrowed from loan sharks against your inheritance. Oh, yes, didn't you know your uncle knew that? My dear, I feel exactly the same way about you. But whether you like it or not, unless we pull together, we'll both go down. Now, is that what you want?
I do know that Mrs. White and the Professor were doing some ghastly job trying to clear a blocked drain or something. Professor Plum kept asking where the tools were kept. Really, I was in no position to offer advice. I don't think I've ever seen a wrench in my life. Yes, I did see it. Uncle Boddy and Mrs. Peacock were in the study, and that's where I saw the knife. I waited until they'd gone, and then I took it. It's no use asking me what I was going to do with it. I just don't know. I lost my nerve and hid the knife in the lounge. I don't know what I was thinking of. No, I can't help you. I haven't seen Uncle Boddy's gun for ages. He practices in the billiard room, sometimes. He's got a kind of a shooting gallery in there, although I don't remember seeing him use it this weekend. I expect you mean the silver candlesticks in the dining room. Do you know, I was in the dining room this evening, and I honestly can't remember whether they were there or not. What I can tell you is that I saw Mr. Green with the candlesticks in the corridor earlier on. Lead pipe? I really do think that this is rather silly. Perhaps you could explain to me why I should know anything about lead pipes. It's hardly likely that I would have seen one in the house, is it? Ah, the rope. I suppose I have to tell you what actually happened. I just hope you believe me. You see, I wanted to stop Uncle Boddy. I had to stop him, but I didn't know what to do. I took the rope from the hall cupboard and went to see Colonel Mustard with it in the lounge. I had this silly idea of trying to frighten Uncle Boddy with it. The Colonel thought it was ridiculous, and he took the rope off me. He went off with it, and I didn't see it again. I didn't really want to hurt Uncle Boddy. You may have heard by now that I was expecting to inherit everything from Uncle. Arlington Hall, his money, everything. There was nobody else, you see. Knowing that his money was coming to me, I had borrowed against it, and now Uncle was talking about handing it all over to the brothers. I had to do something. That's why I persuaded Colonel Mustard to help me set a trap for Uncle Boddy. We never expected Mrs. White to get hurt. But Uncle Boddy's change of heart didn't only affect me, you know. Mrs. Peacock has been after him for years. Saw herself as the next Mrs. Boddy, I think. She had a terrible row with him in the study, and actually threatened him with his own knife. I really could not believe it when Uncle told us he was planning to enter Brother Jerome's order, and that he was taking a vow of silence. It sounded quite preposterous to me, and if you'd known Uncle Boddy as I did, you'd know exactly what I mean. I realized that after his accident he might have found some peace with the brothers, but really... Anyway, he certainly upset a lot of people. Maybe I'm reading too much into the situation, but I saw Mr. Green earlier, marching down the corridor with a face like thunder, carrying 2 candlesticks. I think the Colonel was watching him too. He was probably as mystified as I was. I'm sure I'll remember other interesting facts, but I've nothing to add right now.
A billiard cue and balls scattered on the floor.
Why are you doing it, man? And don't talk to me about Brother Jerome and seeing the light. That won't wash.
Perhaps I did underestimate people's need for me here.
Well, what about the £5,000 that you lent me to set up my own company? What's going to happen to that? How do I know that Brother Jerome won't want his money back, eh?
No true friend need fear my intentions. only those who are gambling that I'm a complete fool.
What do you mean, gambling?
Someone else's big gamble that didn't come off. Eh, Colonel?
No, I'm afraid I can't help you. I gather Plum and Mrs. White were trying to unblock a drain in the yard. You really ought to ask them. I am quite ashamed of my behavior earlier today. I decided the Boddy must be toying with us all, and that he had no real intention of handing over everything to Brother Jerome. I thought I might find some way to prove that he was lying. So I broke into his desk. I found a letter, but it wasn't what I needed. Unfortunately, Boddy interrupted me and I attacked him. Clearly, he got the better of me, otherwise I would be admitting to murder, which I am not. I can prove my innocence. Initially, I was in the ballroom, but Miss Scarlett and then Plum came in. They eventually left, but my peace had been shattered, so I went to the dining room. Colonel Mustard arrived, armed with his cigars, and we both remained there until we heard about Boddy. Boddy was a totally devious and untrustworthy man. Nobody knew whether to believe that he was really going to join the brothers or not. But I couldn't take the risk that he was telling the truth. He had promised to lend me the money to have my home repaired, and now he was handing everything over to the brothers. It was more than I could bear. I met up with Miss Scarlett and suggested that we could work together, but she has a very short temper. She actually struck me. Boddy's decision was having a poor effect on both of us. Oh, we both had so much to lose. I've nothing to add at present.
A hollowed-out book. Nothing in the book. Gun hidden behind books. Fingerprints Mr. Green, Professor Plum, and Colonel Mustard. Gun fired recently. No bullets.
Today is the first day of my new life, a life which will affect you, my dear friends. After my crash, as you know, I was cared for by Brother Jerome and the monks of the Order of Silence. If you will forgive a poor joke, I was on the road to Damascus, not Arlington, when I was hit by that car. And now, nothing can be the same again. On Monday morning at 11:30, I will be received into that order as a novice by Brother Jerome himself, and I will turn over all my worldly goods to them.
For goodness sakes, man.
You are my friends, my dear friends, and I will be sure that you are taken care of as you deserve. I know I will be misunderstood, but my first action as a novice will be to assume the vow of silence.
Why are you doing this to me? Why are you ruining my life?
Yes, I saw a piece of lead pipe when I was in the hall with the professor. Later on, when he wanted a hammer, I remembered the pipe and I thought maybe that would do. The hammer had disappeared completely. The professor said the pipe was too long or too short or something. Anyway, he didn't want it, so I took it back to the kitchen. I left it on the windowsill until I had a minute to put it back in the hall cupboard. I forgot about it after that. Even the mildest mannered people have hidden depths, you know. Take the professor. When he realized that some of Boddy's antiques were missing, he mentioned it to me and I told Green. We gave the professor some money to keep quiet, and he took it. That's blackmail, isn't it? I told the professor he should kill Green, but he did nothing about it. Perhaps he killed Boddy. I can't vouch for either of them for the whole time after dinner. I was with Mr. Green for a while and Colonel Mustard in the lounge. Then we all went our separate ways, and I ended up with the professor and Miss Scarlett in the library, and that's where we stayed. How someone like Mr. Boddy could have been taken in by those monks, I'll never know. I reckon his brain must have been damaged in the car crash, not just his leg. But Mr. Boddy had something that I needed. A letter that had come from an antique dealer in London. It proved that certain items had been sold, and Boddy's signature had been forged. I was going to take the letter from his safe in the dining room. I removed the key from the hollowed-out book in the library, but when I went to open the safe, there was a shout and a flash, and that's the last thing I remember. Perhaps Mrs. Peacock can tell you something more. She was there when I came round. I'm afraid I can't think of anything else to tell you at the moment.
Blood on floor. Tests show blood to be Mr. Boddy's. Rope. A drawer forced. No fingerprints.
Who's there? Come on, in. Thank you.
The devil looks after his own, doesn't he, Boddy?
Would you kindly tell me what you were trying to do?
If I couldn't find anything in here to stop you, I was going to kill you.
Is there anything you people won't do for money?
Don't you patronize me, Boddy. If you don't need your money anymore, then leave it to those of us who have to live in the real world.
However much I left you, you'd want more. Greed feeds on itself.
You promised me that loan. You went back on your word. And now the difference is you'll go into a monastery while I'll lose my home.
You'll thank me for this one day, my dear. Believe me. Now get out of here before I forget my good nature and call the police.
I'm sure you've discovered by now that Mrs. White and I had been taking Boddy's antiques and selling them for some time. I had always intended to replace them when my finances looked a bit better. But then Plum started blackmailing us, and Mrs. White wanted to keep going, so I had no choice, really. Mrs. White told me that I should kill Boddy, but I don't know how she expected me to do that. She gave me 2 big candlesticks, and it wasn't clear to me whether she intended these to be used as weapons or not. I'd understand if you thought she'd killed him, but she was with me, so it can't have been her, can it? I warned Plum that unless he did something about Boddy, I might end up going to jail. And if I did, my friends, who don't like blackmailers much, would be looking for him. I even gave him a weapon. He could have done it easily, and nobody would have suspected him, because nobody knew about his little blackmail racket except Mrs. White and me. Perhaps Plum did do it. I certainly didn't see him all evening. I was in the lounge with Mrs. White. The Colonel was there too for a while, but then he left, muttering about his cigars. We never moved from there after that. I'm afraid that's everything I know.
I'm sorry. That's about it for the present, I'm afraid.
I know that this is hard to believe, but when Mr. Green offered me money to keep quiet about the antiques he and Mrs. White were stealing, I never thought of it as blackmail. In retrospect, I'm not sure that other people would have seen it that way, though, especially Mr. Boddy. But there were others with just as much to lose. Take Miss Scarlett. She was very upset by the whole business. Perhaps that explains why I saw her earlier in the day hiding a huge and vicious-looking knife in the log basket in the lounge. She couldn't be the murderer, though, because she was with me the whole time. We started off in the ballroom. Mrs. Peacock was there, too. Then I went down to the library and met up with Mrs. White. Miss Scarlett followed me in. Unless, of course, she'd left the knife in the lounge for somebody else. I'm afraid I can't think of anything else to tell you at the moment.
You think the murder took place in the billiard room? Which weapon? And this is your accusation? You think the murderer was Mr. Green, in the billiard room, with the lead pipe?
Well done. You've got everything right. You've solved the murder mystery. Now, let's go through it stage by stage and see what happened.
Mr. Green knew that he was in trouble as soon as he heard about Mr. Boddy's conversion. With Mrs. White's help, he'd been quietly stealing Mr. Boddy's antiques for a long time. Once Brother Jerome was entrusted with the property, the game would be up. He tried to persuade the professor to kill Mr. Boddy, but that didn't work. Mr. Green didn't think he had the nerve to do it himself. But he was soon to find out. When Mr. Green left the lounge, he saw Mr. Boddy in the corridor. It was at that moment that Mr. Green decided to settle up with Mr. Boddy for good. He went into the kitchen looking for some sort of weapon, and there he saw it, sitting on the windowsill, the lead pipe that Mrs. White had left there earlier. He wrapped it in a newspaper and went looking for Mr. Boddy. He found him in the billiard room, leaning over the table, about to take a shot. The cue fell to the floor, and the ball scattered everywhere as the lead pipe did its work. Mr. Green was careful. He cleaned the pipe on the paper, and then he wrapped the paper around the pipe. He went down to the kitchen and hid them both under the kitchen sink.
And there you have it. That's how Mr. Boddy met his fate. Why not come back again and see if you can solve the next murder at Arlington Hall?